Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first day of AP Statistics. This is Chapter 1, Section 1. You should be able to find this PowerPoint or a PDF document on your Canvas webpage as we go through. So the first thing, Chapter 1 is an introduction to statistics. So there may be some things you already know or you've already seen from your previous classes. But you will want to kind of go through this and take notes of the most important things. So Section 1.1 is analyzing categorical data. And there's a picture of a bar graph there and talks about some statistics. So an introduction to data analysis, what we should know after this section is we should be able to define individuals and variables. We should be able to distinguish between categorical and quantitative variables, define a distribution, and describe the idea behind what inference is. So the first question, and hopefully the video kind of went through this, but what is the study of statistics? And statistics is the science of data. So in this course, you're going to see three different aspects, or four actually different aspects of statistics. The first one is data analysis. So this means we already have a group of numbers and we're just going to analyze it. And we're going to analyze it by organizing, displaying, summarizing, and asking questions. And that's going to be the first three chapters. So the first few weeks of class is what you're looking at, with different types of graphs and different types of displays that you'll see for us to organize our data. In Chapter 4, we go to data collection, which is one you'll remember maybe from Math 3, and that's where we'll talk about whether we're doing samples, surveys, or experiments. And it's just the process of selecting the data from there and collecting it. Chapters 5 through 7 deal with probability, so that's another big part of this course. Probability, the process of chance, so like rolling a die, flipping a coin, all those things. And then the last thing to bring it all together is chapters 8 through 12, which are inference. And that is the process of making a prediction. So to infer, we're going to predict. So you're going to use data that you have to predict. And that kind of leads us into the next slide. So this picture kind of shows you what we're talking about with inference. Inference and statistics in general is when you take a sample. If you see the orange sample there, it's inside of the population. So you take a sample that is inside of the population, you collect data from that sample, and you want it to be representative of the population, and then you perform some analysis, and then you make an inference about the entire population. So instead of having to survey the entire population, you only had to survey a sample, and you're able to make a conclusion about your entire population. So in this section, the first important thing is a variable. So you want to define, you want to know what a variable is. And a variable is any characteristic of an individual or an object. And we're able to split variables up into two types. So a categorical variable is usually an adjective and rarely is a number. I will show you one case where it could be a number. Gender is a variable. Race, your grade in school, sophomore, junior, senior, freshman, those are variables. Your zip code would also be a variable because it separates you by category, right? What category you're in, where you live, what geographic location. Quantitative variables are always numbers, and you must be able to find the mean of the number. So if you're questioning whether it is quantitative or not, if you're thinking of zip code, you can't find the mean of a zip code or the average number, but you would for weight, for height, for GPA, for the number of classes taken, for the square footage of your house. All those are examples of quantitative variables. And a distribution is what we're going to talk about. A distribution describes what values the variable takes and how often it takes it. So again, a dot plot is an example of a distribution. It is skewed to the left. So when we talk about skewed, we talk about where the tail is. And in this one, you can see that there is a tail in the graph off to the left. So a lot of the data is over towards the right, and so it is called skewed left. And the median of this one, it says, is 28. So if we took all the dots and found the middle one, that middle dot is at 28. So that's a distribution. So in this first section where you're analyzing categorical data, we're going to look specifically at bar graphs and pie charts and recognize what are some good ones and bad. Construct and interpret some two-way tables. So we're going to be able to look at two-way tables and describe the relationship between two categorical variables. So if you look at this slide here, the distribution of a categorical variable will either give you the count, which is the frequency, or it will give you the percentage, which is called the relative frequency. So for instance, if we're looking at students' favorite course, whether it's English, foreign language, history, math, or science, you can see the number of students that have chosen each course. That's the count. And if we were doing a percentage, which would be called a relative frequency, then we would just add up how many we have. So we have 12, 23, 38, 50. So we have 50 students. So if 8 of them like English, that's 16%. If 4 like foreign language, that's 8%. 11 with history, that's 22%. 15 for math, that's 30%. 12 for science, that's 24%. So that is your distribution. So how would we display some of this data? When you display categorical data, you're going to use a frequency table that I just showed you can sometimes be difficult to read through. A lot of times it's easier for people to visualize this with a bar graph or a pie chart. So if you look to the left, you see a bar graph. It has the x-axis labeled. The horizontal axis is labeled with the different types of music. And then the vertical axis is labeled with how many stations play that type of music. And so it's a lot easier to see that, country and news talk is at the highest and that contemporary hit is towards the bottom, and Spanish and rock from looking at the bar graph. You can also use a pie chart. So a pie chart also makes it easier to see, as you can see what are the biggest sections. A pie chart does need a key. So you have a key over here that tells you what each color stands for in your pie chart. And it must add up to 100% to be able to use those. So bar graphs can compare the heights of the bars. Our eyes react to the area, so your bars need to be equally wide. If you look at this ad for DirecTV, you see the 95 is a lot wider than the 81 or even the 56. So it makes the 95 look a whole lot bigger than it actually is. So it exaggerates the difference to get people to choose DirecTV more. And so that's a bad bar graph. So you want to make sure you do not make your bar graphs look like that. So a two-way table is the next thing that we want to look at. A two-way table describes two categorical variables. So in this case, the two categorical variables are how many clubs are you a member of, either none, one, or two or more, and then whether you ride the school bus or not. So basically a two-way table is asking the person two questions. So question one would be, how many clubs are you a member of at the school? And then question two would be, do you ride the bus or not to school? And you can see how we have totaled each row. So we know 108 students ride the bus. We know 142 students do not ride the bus. We know there's 250 total students. We also know 71 students are members of no clubs. We know 77 students are members of one club. And we know 102 students are members of two or more clubs. So a couple questions in this example. The first one is, what proportion of students that ride the school bus are members of two or more clubs? So we're only going to look at students who ride the school bus. There's 108 total students who ride the school bus. And what proportion of those are members of 2 or more clubs? That would be 20 out of 108. So if I was writing that answer, I would write out 20 divided by 108 and then the decimal for that. What proportion of students that are members of no clubs do not ride the school bus? So we want to look only at students who are members of no clubs, which is 71. And what proportion of those do not ride the school bus? That would be 16 out of 71. And again, we would write the decimal with that as well. And then the last question, what proportion of students that do not ride the school bus, so we're only looking at does not ride the school bus, there's 142 of those, are members of at least one club? Now, in this case, all of these would be members of at least one club. So that would be 126 out of 142. And again, you could find it by adding those. You could also find it by looking at how many are members of no clubs, which is 16, and subtracting that from 142. So you always want to write the fraction and the decimal when it asks you for the proportion. Couple more questions on here. It says, what proportion of males have a good chance at being rich? So if we look only at males, there's 2,459. A good chance at being rich, that would be 758 out of 2,459. What proportion of females think they have a 50-50 chance at being rich? That would be 696 out of 2,367. And then the last question, what proportion of young adults that have an almost certain chance of being rich? So that means we're looking at all young adults that have an almost certain chance of being rich. That's 1,083 are male. So that's 597 out of 1,083. And again, you want to type those in and also write your decimal. So you want to have your calculator handy for that. So categorical distributions, they don't have to just be 2 questions, or, they can be more columns. So you notice here you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then sophomore, junior, senior. So you could have multiple things when you're comparing categorical distributions. You could have separated them into grade and how many clubs they're in. You could separate them by many things, but you always want to total out your rows. Now, if you look at this one, when you compare categorical distributions, notice we're going to look at 1 as being the color blue, 2 red, 3 green, 4 purple, and 5 light blue. And notice they should all add to 100%. So if we look at seniors, we look at what percent of them have 1, what percent of them have 2, what percent have 3, what percent have 4, and what percent have 5. And these are all percentages. And then remember, if you look at juniors, if we go back up, none of them had 1, and same for sophomores. So none of them have the blue. So we're just adding how many they have and making sure that it all adds up to 100%. This is called a segmented bar graph. So you make sure that it adds up to 100%. And then here's the does not ride the bus and rides the bus. And you can clearly see that those who ride the bus, a lot of them are not members of clubs, which may be because they don't have transportation. And a lot of students who do not ride the bus are members of 2 or more clubs. So you get a big percentage. So it's a lot easier to compare these. You can also see the sophomores. Most of them are in 4. You see 4 is their biggest. You can see the juniors. Most of them are in 3. You can see the seniors. Most of them are in 2 as you look and compare these on a segmented bar graph. So finally, when you're comparing categorical distributions, when you're writing it, you want to use specifics. So you want to talk specifically and say like 52% of seniors like this, or 30% of sophomores like this. And you want to use comparisons like the seniors were greater than the sophomores, or the juniors were less than the freshmen. So you want to use comparison words. and transition, however, whereas, similarly, things like that. And you always want to discuss at least 2 points of comparison. So you don't want to just say the seniors had more in one group. You want to compare different groups and kind of look at all the groups as they go through. So the question on this graph that we had earlier says, is there an association between after-school club participation and whether or not the student rides the school bus? Support your answer with the discussion of the provided graphs. So an association means, is there a relationship between whether students participate in an after-school club and whether they ride the bus or not? And the way we would use this graph is we would say students who ride the bus, looks like just over 50% or right around 50% of those do not participate in a club. And it looks like just over 30% of those only participate in one. Okay. Whereas if you look at the students who do not ride a bus, there is less than 20% that are members of no clubs, which is a lot smaller than the 50% here. It goes from about 15 or 10 to 40. So there's about maybe 30% that are members of one club, which is very similar to those who ride the bus. But the biggest difference is over 50% of students who do not ride the bus are members of 2 or more clubs. And you can see that's less than 20% of students who ride the bus. So when you don't ride the bus, your chance of being a member of 2 or more clubs is way over half of those students. So you would write that out in sentences and explain what I just talked about with the graphs and how that works. That's how you would compare these distributions. So an example or just a sample answer there to show you the last part, a sample answer for comparing the distributions is, yes, there is a clear association between after-school club participation and transportation. Only 11% of students who don't ride the bus do not participate in after-school clubs, whereas 51% of students who do ride the bus do not participate. Similarly, 58% of students who do not ride the bus are involved in 2 or more clubs, while only 19% of students riding the bus are involved in 2 or more clubs. The proportion of students who participate in one club, however, is the same for students who ride and students who don't ride the bus. So there we've compared all 3 areas. We compared students riding the bus or not with the 2 or more clubs, with 1 club, and with none. And we've noted the difference between each one. So in this section, the goal is basically going to be to look at those things such as a bar graph, a pie chart, a two-way table, and answer questions on those, and then be able to write a response. So analyzing categorical data also means to look at the graph and be able to explain what the graph means. So that's the analyzing part. Explain what the difference is or what the comparison is between the two things. So your work today, we'll go over that, and we'll go through categorical data, and hopefully this will help you as you move forward. Have a good day.